Please welcome Alan Murray, Fortune, and Lawrence H. Summers, Charles W. Eliot University Professor and President Emeritus at Harvard University.
Thank you, Larry, for doing this. And thank you all for paying attention. I want you to know I'm kind of a prop here this afternoon because we've done this before, and Larry's very good at saying pretty much whatever he wants to say regardless of the questions that I ask. But hope springs eternal, so I'll try. But before we start, I want to show a video from an interview I did last November with Jamie Dimon. It's a short video, but it'll get us into the conversation.
It's not going to happen. I mean, you're wasting your time.
So you think they can?
When the DOJ calls someone up and says that's an illegal currency and it's against the laws of the United States of land, if you do it again, we'll put you in jail, it's over.
So you really
there's no issue. There will be, and this is my personal opinion, there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world. There's no government that's going to put up with it for long.
Anybody?
It's kind of cute now. You know, a lot of the senators in Congress will say, I support Silicon Valley innovation. There will be no currency that gets around government controls.
Anybody here want to take an opposite view? Yeah, we got a few people here. We'll get to you. Don't worry about it. So what do you think? I mean, you're former Secretary of Treasury. You were responsible. You signed the currency. I have some bills you signed. Is Jamie Dimon right?
Jamie's a smart guy.
That's not quite.
Bill Gates is a smart guy too, and he said that the internet wasn't going anyplace. Tom Watson's a smart guy, and he said the computers weren't going. There were only going to be 10 uses for large-scale computers worldwide. I think Jamie's right that the people who think that somehow the Bitcoin is going to bring in some libertarian paradise where we're not going to have know your customer rules and we're not going to have rules on money transfer, that won't happen. The government will still control transactions and enforce the basic laws. The people who think that all the currency is going to be debauched and we're going to have hyperinflation and Bitcoin's our salvation, I think they're wrong too, in a world where we've got a real struggle to get up to 2% inflation anywhere in the industrial world. But is the blockchain technology going to be fundamental to reducing frictions? I think the answer is overwhelmingly likely that it's going to be overwhelmingly likely to be yes. Is Bitcoin going to be a valuable store of value in the same way that many people use gold as a store of value? I don't know, but I think certainty that the answer is no doesn't seem to me like the right position to take.
All right, let's parse this a little bit because that was not the full interview, and Jamie Dimon went on to say that J.P. Morgan is investing considerably in the blockchain and the role that the blockchain can play in reducing transactions. But let's stick with money first. As a former Secretary of Treasury, you'll have a unique perspective on this. Can you imagine legal tender? The Bitcoin being accepted as legal tender in the United States. Will the government allow it?
Legal tender is a complicated concept. People buy all kinds of things with frequent flyer miles. People used to buy all kinds of things with green stamps. People buy all kinds of things with claims on accounts at non-bank financial institutions. So could I imagine that some kind of item on a ledger would be something that would be on occasion exchanged? People buy things with American Express traveler's checks. There's something at Harvard which the kids use to buy their meals called Crimson Cash. So I think there are all kinds of things already in a modern capitalist economy that function to facilitate exchange and are exchanged for goods and services. So I don't think there's any a priori barrier to something of this kind coming to take that kind of role. I think there's a very big question, which is whether something whose value is going to fluctuate substantially relative to the basic currency, the dollar, how much traction it will get, and how large a role it will play in exchange.
But there's another question. It's not just that question. I mean, people here for the last 2 days have been talking a lot about regulation. When do your former employees at the Treasury Department feel a need? You had a lot of people working for you who spent a lot of time monitoring large transactions of money. When do they say, hey, wait a minute, this is getting out of hand, we have to regulate?
Oh, those rules are written to say $10,000. I don't know what exactly the rule is, but it's something like you can't enter the United States with $10,000 in cash or negotiable instruments without reporting it. And those rules will for sure get changed so that you can't avoid them with Bitcoin. So the idea, which some of the early advocates of Bitcoin very much had, that there were all these rules about money transferring that were very unpleasant, and somehow Bitcoin could become the basis for avoiding those rules, Jamie Dimon's completely right.
But
that's not going to happen, and anybody who's in doubt should consider where trade sports is today. On the other hand, there are all kinds of legitimate kinds of exchange where it seems to me, if somebody I see my friend Jim Robinson sitting in the front row. American Express had traveler's checks. That was an important product. If anybody thought that somehow traveler's checks were going to become a way for avoiding the various rules and the various ways that the government limited financial transactions, that was a bad idea to have. They were going to facilitate a certain kind of storing value and engaging in exchange.
But they will be regulated
with respect to the technology of the time. They will be regulated like money, but that doesn't mean that they will be regulated out of existence to protect the current kind of money. The basic kinds of regulations we have with respect to money that control money laundering, that control illicit transactions, I think it's very unlikely that Bitcoin would ever become a basis for those rules being eviscerated. In that sense, I think Jamie's right. I think the sense he had, which is that somehow if this become important in a lot of exchanges, the government would feel a need to knock it out of existence. That doesn't seem right to me any more than gold exists as a store of value, and that hasn't caused government to feel that gold needs to be knocked out of existence.
So is what you're hearing from him not the fear the government's going to knock it out of existence, but the fear that it's going to take a big bit of business away from the banks? I mean, where do you see, let me ask you the question another way. Where do you see this going? So you see a role for Bitcoin, and obviously you see a role for the blockchain.
So I see a possible, by the way, I want to be clear. I don't think you can a priori exclude a role for Bitcoin. Whether or not this thing, which depends upon there being a large amount of mutual trust and the first person buying it because he thinks the second person will buy it at a high value, whether it will get traction, I think remains to be seen. Bitcoin has the same character that a fax machine had. A single fax machine is a doorstop. A world where everybody has a fax machine is an immensely valuable thing. Something similar applies with respect to Bitcoin, and so what will happen to the ultimate valuation of Bitcoin? I make no confident prediction one way or the other, and I have no advice to offer on whether to buy or sell Bitcoin at the current price. I only say that I don't think it can be excluded, and I'm reasonably confident that at some point in the future, and the experience with these things is that they take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen faster than you thought they could, that the blockchain will change a great deal of financial practice and exchange. And I think what one has to be struck by is that in a world of really very sophisticated information technology, it's kind of a remarkable thing that if I walk 3 blocks from here and buy a $400 pair of headphones, that somehow $8 will be removed from that transaction for the process of handling the payments. That's really a lot relative to the $400. And that if I sell my house, 6% will be removed by a range of middle people. And that if I put money in the bank, I get less than 1%. And if I try to borrow money on my credit card, I pay more than 16%. That's a lot. And I think there are going to be a lot of pressures that are going to operate to use technology to bring those frictions substantially down. I think there are going to be a lot of pressures that are going to make greater transparency and therefore less need for controls. I think the technology is going to operate in those directions very importantly. I'm pretty sure that something in the general area of the blockchain will be important in that. Whether something in the area of Bitcoin, the 3 possibilities. One is that it'll be the blockchain and dollars. One is that it'll be the blockchain and Bitcoin. And another is that it will be the blockchain and digital currencies, but not Bitcoin.
Not Bitcoin.
And all 3 strike me as plausible possibilities going forward.
Fundamental difference, I suppose, between the blockchain and dollars and the blockchain and Bitcoin or digital currencies is whether it happens inside the current banking system or outside the current banking system, right?
No, I don't think so, because it seems to me that in the same way that Jamie's bank accommodates dollars and accommodates euros and it accommodates Chinese renminbi. I'm pretty confident that if a large number of people want to hold their wealth in the form of Bitcoin, JP Morgan will attempt to provide them with that service. If there's a very large scale activity in trading into and out of Bitcoin, the JP Morgan exchange will choose to attempt to get into that business. Will they succeed? Will they not succeed? That's a different question. My Harvard colleague Clay Christensen makes the point with substantial evidence that more often than not, when there's fairly fundamental disruptive change, incumbents in industries are less likely to succeed and carry it forward than new entrants into industries. So I don't have a prediction to make with confidence about current big financial institutions versus the aspiring financial institutions represented in this room. But I don't think it's right, I think it's actually not right, to say that blockchain is potentially the world of existing financial institutions and Bitcoin or another currency is the world of new financial institutions. I think you could imagine existing institutions being very substantially disrupted by the blockchain without digital currencies, and you could imagine existing financial institutions accommodating to there being a new store of value.
Do you have any sense of the relative magnitude? Some people say that the Bitcoin piece of it will end up being, maybe Jamie Dimon is wrong that it won't not exist, but it'll be relatively small compared to the overall disruption that blockchain technology, ledger technology can bring to the economy, to all those transactions that you talked about and more.
If I had to bet when the financial history of the second seventh of the 21st century is written, the 40 years from now, the blockchain and all that followed from it will figure more prominently in that story than will Bitcoin, because I think that the verification and confidence without trust, and enabling that to be done more pervasively, will be the most fundamental innovation. And while I'm aware that there are a variety of arguments that you can't really get all those benefits without Bitcoin, my suspicion is that ways will be found to get many of those benefits without the extra uncertainty associated with the fluctuation in the value of Bitcoin relative to the ways in which people currently hold money and denominate transactions.
So what's the economic effect of this? I mean, if this technology really has the potential to get rid of that fee that you pay when you buy your headphones or when you buy your house or when you do foreign exchange transactions, there are an awful lot of people employed, some of them I suspect in this room, employed off of those dollars. What is the overall economic effect of that kind of change ripping through the financial institutions?
Oh, look, I think it's hugely positive. You know, when the automobile was invented, there were jobs lost doing various things, taking care of horses, but that wasn't a serious argument against the invention of the automobile. So the fact that there will be disruption and that there will be a variety of jobs engaged in one way or another with, for example, credit card processing.
Well, it's not just credit card processing. I mean,
I don't think that
the whole financial sector is built on those.
First of all,
those transaction fees.
If the service can be, it's not that it is such remarkably high margin business. So if you take out the costs and you take out the revenues, there's a balance, and we will still have a financial sector. And if a smaller share of America's most talented people find themselves working in the financial sector, I think the nation will survive. And so I don't think that we should design our policies with the objective of maximizing employment in the financial sector. And I think the experience is that in general, when you reduce frictions, you make possible previously unimaginable combinations, and that you tend to see benefits that you couldn't foresee at first before those frictions were reduced. So I don't think even a half dozen years ago, the kinds of efficiencies in conserving on space and structures that Airbnb has made possible were something that was pervasively imagined, or the kind of advantages that have come in making transportation more efficient from Uber were imaginable. And I think the gains will be of a qualitatively similar sort. That's why I think this is something that is potentially hugely exciting.
And how do you explain the fact that if we are on the verge of these technologies that have such incredibly powerful transformative possibilities for finance and frankly in other areas, but this conferences focused on finance, that we're not seeing that in the government statistics and the productivity numbers. I mean, productivity is way down from the average of the last 5-6 decades. Why aren't we seeing this technological change create rising productivity, which in turn would lead to rising living standards?
So that's a huge question, and it's not that the economics profession knows the answer. My best guess is what I would call the productivity J-curve, which, or to put it a different way, that the creative occurs before the destruction. So let's take an example from the past. What happened when the first superstore was invented? The month that the first superstore was invented, a bunch of capital got used building it, and a bunch of people got hired working in it, and total sales didn't change at all. So at that moment, productivity went down. At that moment, you had the same level of sales that you did before, and you had all the people working in the old stores, and you had the people working in the superstore, so productivity went down. Ultimately, took a bunch of time. Ultimately, it became clear that the superstores were more efficient. People went to the superstores. Other smaller stores shrunk. And ultimately, productivity was higher. But the initial effect was a decrease in productivity rather than an increase in productivity. And my sense is that that's happening in many different parts of the economy. There are a lot of people working on driverless cars, but no chauffeur has yet been replaced. And so right now, the net effect is to reduce productivity rather than to increase productivity, but one would assume that ultimately the effect will be to increase productivity. And if you look historically, every single example, the productivity growth always takes longer to happen than you think it will. If you look at productivity from 1895, when electricity started, until the First World War, it was terrible. And then it took off rapidly with electricity. Bob Solow, the great MIT economist, famously observed in 1987 that computers were everywhere except in the productivity statistics. So I have a suspicion, and look, it could easily turn out that there's some amount of hype in all of this, and that's certainly a possibility. But I think that it is natural to suppose that during the period of implementation of these inventions, you get both things going. And if you've got some of that going on, some actual reduction in productivity from the process, and then some places where productivity is increasing, and you have a period of a lot of ferment, it wouldn't be surprising that productivity growth would appear low for some significant interval. The other part of it, of course, is mismeasurement. I mean, we don't have a clue. I mean, I don't think anybody conceptually has a clue, and certainly the government statisticians don't have a clue how to think about the extra productivity in financial services that comes from the fact that I can use my debit card in a taxi, and I didn't used to be able to. And so there are also all kinds of issues associated with the measurement of productivity.
Your best guess, as an observer of these things, do you think the digitization of industries, blockchain in financial services, what's happening elsewhere, do you think that they are bringing about changes in the economy that are on a par with the steam engine or electricity, with the industrial revolutions of the past? Best guess.
If you define digitization broadly, so artificial intelligence is part of digitization, then I think there's a very good chance that the answer to that question is yes.
Is yes.
Yeah.
Do you own any Bitcoin?
I do not own any Bitcoin.
Here, you can have mine. We'll start right there with that. You now have 1/100th of a Bitcoin. If you use
1/100th. You are hardly a sport.
Least I could do for you. Are you using a number of interesting startups in this room? Circle. Are you using any of those services? Or are you sticking with Larry Summers signed $20 bills?
I have, to my knowledge, not transacted directly in Bitcoin or any Bitcoin allied activity, though
you're open to it in the future.
I'm entirely open to it, and look, I think that this whole sphere is ripe for huge. I think there's huge opportunity here, and I guess I'd conclude on the thought that we have over the last generation had a lot of financial innovation for the benefit of money. And I think it's a good thing to have some financial innovation for the benefit of people in the form of reducing their costs of transacting and exchanging. And I think that's what this is all about.
Great. Good way to end. Thank you. Thanks.